So I'm Muffy Kaysberg, and I am the current chair of the board of Ohio End of Life Options. And thank you all for coming tonight to our town hall. We're excited to tell you what we've been accomplishing behind the scenes. A lot of our activity that we had planned for 2020 and into 2021 has come to a screeching halt in terms of events and those kinds of things. But we've been doing some work behind the scenes and doing fundraising. We started a virtual book club. If people are interested in that, there'll be a slide about that later, I believe. And we welcome you tonight and hope you're excited to hear about what progress we have made and what we're doing in the coming year. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa at this point, our executive director.
So welcome to everyone. Thank you. We really have a very interesting group joining us today. We have some faces who are very familiar and know a lot about what we do. We have some people, again, from afar, and we have some people who are brand new and don't know much about us or the issue itself. So this is going to be a lot presented at once to try and skim over a lot of the issues we're looking at. And we would love to then follow up later with more talks targeted at things that might be of more interest to us in the future. This is a picture of my parents. I grew up in Oregon, and this is my parents taking a walk in Oregon in 2006. They are an amazing couple, or were an amazing couple who did everything they could to live life well. They understood very well that death is a part of life, and did everything that they could to live in a way that really honored life and each other and their own wishes. And so I like to show this photo because it really talks about the path that we are on as a result of my experience with my stepfather at the end of his life. And what we are doing is a journey. It is a marathon and not a sprint. And so it often helps me to come back and really think of this photo to remember that we are on this path and we are moving forward. A little bit ago, HBO put out a documentary called Alternate Endings, and the historian John Meacham, in his review of it, said, people are starting to assert their own power over the dying process. And I think that that is somewhat true, but I would also assert that it is less true in states like ours, like Ohio. And that is quite honestly because, first of all, we simply don't talk a lot about death and dying. And second of all, we don't have policies in place that other states have that would help honor those wishes at the end of life, even if we have gone through the process of exploring our end of life wishes and documenting them and talking about them. We don't have all of the policies in place here to ensure that those wishes are respected. And I just love this quote from Dick, who said, planning those final days gives me a sense of participation and satisfaction in that. He lived in California, and he was able to acquire the medications made available through its End of Life Option Act. And he died peacefully at home, surrounded by his family in California. When I come back to this, when I talk about Dick Shannon and his how satisfying it was to participate in the planning of the end of his life, that is really our experience that I had with my stepfather, Dr. Jack Rowe, who was a retired neurologist, who lived in Oregon when he was diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome, or a form of bone marrow cancer. And he, from the very beginning of his diagnosis, felt thankful to live in a state where he had this option. We had actually talked about it over the years. My mother and I both lived there when they were debating the law and then voting on it. So it had been sort of part of my background for a long time without me even knowing it. And the topic arose quite a few times because we talked about death and dying in our family. And when Jack was diagnosed, he was very upfront with the family, and he said, I've got this diagnosis. He was quite frail, having lived with other serious illnesses, and he felt empowered at that moment in his life to have a sense of self-determination, that he could say when his suffering was too great and when it was time to gather his loved ones and die peacefully in the place and time that he chose. Jack, before that, communicated with his family and friends, and he happened to, so he was diagnosed in August. His birthday happened to be in October. So he called together family and friends from across the country, and he had this celebration of life. And he wanted no tears. He just wanted joy and laughter. And so he made it a roast. And he said, you know, if you can tell a funny story about me, I will try and have a funny one prepared to tell about you too. But this was just a remarkable gathering in that, you know, some people didn't agree with what he was doing, and he was really fine with that. He could talk to them and discuss it. But in the end, he just felt a sense of peace and a sense of comfort. And that's how we felt. So a month later, on November 11th, Jack was declining in health, and he understood it was time to set a date to die. And that is a weird concept in our society. But not only did he know that his health was such that he could possibly lose the ability to take the drugs on his own, as you have to, or lose capacity to make the decision. And so he also, for practical reasons, like me living in Ohio and wanting to be there, knew that he had to set a date. And so he set the date of November 11th, and we planned for that. I arrived at their place the night before, and we had dinner, and we sat around their table and talked. And he and his son, James, who was in the very back in the middle, the tall gentleman next in the light blue shirt, helped him prepare the medication. And my mother hovered nearby, knowing that the end was coming and wanting to have her last moments with Jack, but not wanting to participate in that particular part of how his end would go. The next morning we got there, and we again gathered around the table, and we talked about it. We talked about how strange and surreal that moment was. And we told him that we loved him, that he could change his mind, and that was really okay. And that we supported him in his decision. And he just said, well, it's time. And he got up, he was able to walk into the bedroom and get into the bed, and we surrounded him. And he prepared the medication with the juice that he wanted, and took it, drank it quickly. It didn't taste good. But then we talked, and he was so frail, the medication worked for him. In about 5 minutes, he was sleeping so soundly that we actually had to move him down in bed to lie down. And then he died in 20 minutes. And it was so incredibly peaceful in the setting he wanted in his bedroom, with the classical guitar music that he loved, and the sun streaming through the window and us surrounding him, that on that same day, I said to my mother, we have to share this. We have to tell people about this, because we know that not everybody's death is exactly according to their wishes and according to their plans. When I came back to Ohio, what I found was that, again, people don't talk about death and dying. But when people do hear my story, they tell theirs. And the problem is that people don't have the same options. And we do have people suffering here. We now have a gentleman named Alex Keller-Beal who is on our board of directors because last year at the age of 24, he was the primary caregiver for his mother, Leslie, as she died with ovarian cancer. Leslie was a dynamic force of nature. She was in development. She worked for causes that she loved. She was a ball of fire. She just had, I didn't know her, but everything I have heard about her is just remarkable. And Alex and his family's life were so changed by their experience with Leslie, who unfortunately really lingered and suffered at the end of her life. She had great hospice care. She had a great community of support, but she suffered. And for Alex, I think his best way to move forward and honor his mother was to work to take action to make change in Ohio so that others would have this option. And so he and his family created the Leslie Keller-Beal Memorial Fund with our organization. And in late November, that fund raised, they had a matching donation of $10,000 from their family. It raised almost $30,000 in just a few weeks' time. The outpouring of support for Alex and his family, I think, was so gratifying to them, but they also included comments. And it was a moment for them to celebrate Leslie with all these people who remembered her and could take a moment to celebrate who she was and not just how he died. And we so appreciate this fund because it will help us tell stories of people across Ohio and do research and things like that in her memory. So just to review medical aid in dying, for those who are not too familiar with this concept, it's legislation that allows a mentally competent, terminally ill adult resident of the state to request and self-administer a prescription to hasten his or her imminent death. It's a very strict voluntary process with multiple safeguards. The person who requests it wants to live, but understands that he or she is dying. And now that is an interesting concept because I run across so many people who, because they're not talking about this, simply don't know how close they are to death. But these people tend to know. And it allows a person to die, again, like Jack did, at a time and place of his or her choosing. We talk about Oregon's Death with Dignity Act that's been in place it's been active since 1998 because it was the first state to create this legislation. And they really had to do it to balance it with the safeguards to protect anybody from abuse versus making it accessible to people who wanted the option. So again, two different doctors have to confirm a terminal diagnosis of 6 months or less to live, which is compatible with being enrolled in hospice care. They have to be mentally capable to make the decision. This is not something that can be written into an advanced directive for those with dementia or Alzheimer's. You have to make 3 requests, 2 oral and 1 written. There's a waiting period. And you must be able to take the medication on your own. No one else can give it to you. Now, as laws are changing, as more and more states enact the laws, every state is a little different and they use a slightly different language, but these safeguards have largely remained the same. An important part of this too is that pharmacists and physicians and anyone involved can opt out. Another really important thing, I think, is that patients must be counseled about their options for the end-of-life care, like hospice, pain management, comfort care, spiritual guidance. And what we've seen is that this really helps people understand what else they can be getting in addition to access to this option. We want them to be getting all of the best care at the end of life. And it's also very important that the person can change their mind at any time. The unique thing that the Oregon's law did was that they collected data about who used the law, and that's been really important to help understand how it works. What we know is that use remains very rare. Over 20 years of its use, it remains less than 1% of the deaths in any given year, the total deaths in any given year. A third of the people who get the prescription never use it. And that is partially because people feel a sense of comfort that they are able to determine when their suffering becomes too much and maybe they don't need it. Sometimes people decline so much that they're not able to use it. We know that most of these people have cancer, followed by neurodegenerative diseases like ALS. I think it's really such an important point that most of these people are enrolled in hospice and are getting that care as well. And then when you ask people where they want to die, the great proportion of people say they want to die at home, and the people who use this law largely do. As we've talked about this, these are the most common misperceptions that come up. This sort of belief that hospice just sort of slips a person a little bit extra, whatever medication, when the time comes. And this is very concerning to me for two reasons. I think it's a real disservice to both patients and the hospice community, because people don't understand that a lot of times it's people in the home who are helping to manage the medications. And people in the hospice health caregivers are very concerned about perception of an overdose. There is a concept of managing symptoms to the degree that it may end up causing death, but that is not the commonplace practice that people think. And so that, to me, is a concern, because people aren't having the full conversations that need to happen about what happens at the end of life. If they think this is happening, they're not going to discuss everything they're hoping and wishing for. In Ohio, we know a lot about Dr. Kevorkian because he was from Michigan. And so they say, that's just euthanasia, like what Dr. Kevorkian did. And that gives us an opportunity to say, actually, euthanasia is not legal in any state in the United States. And what Dr. Kevorkian did, some people, quite frankly, when I talk to them, I never know if they think that he's a hero or a horrible person. But what we do know is when he helped people administer the medication to end their lives, when he did, and did administer the medication, it raised awareness of the fact that we needed safeguards. We needed to codify this process and have safeguards to protect people as well. And then that's for people that this is very common. People think, oh, that's for people with Alzheimer's or dementia. And in fact, that's not true. It's not true in any of the states with these laws. You cannot write this into an advanced directive. That cohort of people, when they decline into advanced dementia or Alzheimer's, and are considered terminal, no longer have the capacity to make the decision. And if they were somehow to write this in, then it would become euthanasia, because somebody else would have to make that decision for them and administer it. So that is not a part of the laws. It has not been successful in any state that has tried to open their safeguards to allow this. The thing that drives me crazy is this reaction that I get from people who say people have control, they can use a gun. And I just keep hoping that if people say that out loud again, that they'll realize that that is such a cruel option. It causes trauma to loved ones who anticipate grieving a loved one who is dying of maybe stage 4 cancer, and they come to find them and are traumatized by this. These are the people who come to state houses to testify in support of this peaceful option. Now I am going to turn it over to Molly McMahon Graziano, who is our wonderful, amazing Director of Outreach and Education.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you. So what I'm going to focus on is a little bit about what's happening across the country, and we're going to talk about some action items and some things coming up that we're doing in 2021, and kind of give you some statistics just to give you a little snapshot of how we're trying to be the best stewards of resources that we have by using different things, because we are a very small staff as well. But I've had the privilege the past few weeks to help out the national organization, and this is from their website, and it's a map that just kind of gives you, you know, an at a glance view of what's happening across the country. And as I've been working with their social media, I'm always interested to see that everybody thinks it's not going to happen in their state, or we need this in my state, and they don't realize, well, it takes a group of people to bring that forward in your state, and it takes leadership like Lisa saying, hey, we're going to, make this happen in Ohio, but we're going to need a lot of people's help to do that. But right now, the big three states that are pretty, I would say close, fingers crossed. New Mexico's just passed the House, and it's heading to the Senate for their hearings. If it passes the Senate, it will go to the governor's desk, who has indicated that she will sign it. We're also working with New York and Massachusetts. Massachusetts has kind of been on and off for a while. New York, we're getting ready to do a big campaign there, and we're working with a lot of coalitions in those states as well. So it's kind of been, it's been really interesting to kind of get that 30,000 foot view, and then being able to come back and put those things into play here in Ohio. Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar, back in 2018, Lisa worked very, very closely with Senator Tavares. Senator Tavares had been interested in putting together an aid and dying bill, but time is busy and things are going. So Lisa was really her right hand and Death with Dignity National Center, and helping her to bring some draft legislation, and then help her to tailor that to kind of meet what we might be looking at in Ohio. It did go to the Health and Human Services Committee. She was able to do sponsor testimony, but it did not move out of that committee, which is fine. That's really not all that unusual. The fact is, you always want to be having the conversation. And at the same time, it helped to bring some other people to the issue who were like, oh, we do have legislation, like what's going on? So it always allows Lisa and I the opportunity to have a conversation with people. But this is what we'll be doing going forward. We have Ann Rowland is on here, and a couple other folks, so I think our policy committee. And these are going to be the folks, and Lisa are going to be boots on the ground down there in Columbus, really working to raise the awareness with the legislators, and talking with them and educating them about what aid and dying is and what it's not. Because we know that in Ohio, if you look at the survey number there, we know that Ohioans want to at least have this option. And everywhere we go, when we talk to people, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was a group like this, or I'm so happy that somebody's finally doing this in Ohio. So we're gaining momentum pretty much everywhere we go. So you're probably going, well, am I in the wrong presentation? Why are you showing me a gerrymandered map and an ungerrymandered map? I'm showing you this, and I'm using the congressional map because I thought this was a pretty good illustration. If you live in Ohio, you've probably heard of them on the national news that Ohio is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. And that is going to directly impact our issue at the state level. But I wanted to give you just a little overview of how things look. And I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with what the gerrymandering looks like. For those of you who aren't familiar with gerrymandering, basically what it is it's drawing district lines to benefit one party over another. Both sides do it. It's not good when either side does it, but in 2021, Ohio has an opportunity to redraw these maps. In 2015 and 2018, legislation passed. It was unanimous that both sides of the aisle, in as far as the citizens go, Republicans and Democrats, citizens in Ohio, want fair maps. And everyone agreed that we should be doing this. So there's been a tighter guideline on what's going to be happening when they draw the maps in 2021. But the reason I wanted to bring it up here is because it's not a partisan issue. It's really a voting issue. And because it's all about that representation that we're going to get in Columbus. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So this I've been doing a bunch of different training with some folks, and you can kind of see these numbers just don't really add up. And this is one of the illustrations that they showed us to say, like, if you look even in the congressional results, which I know is national, but 45% of the vote and only 25% of the seats, that, if it doesn't, if it looks like a duck and smells like a duck, it's probably a duck. And that's definitely not what we want to see. And it's never going to be 50-50, but we should not be as out of tune as we are. Lisa, can you go back to the last one just for a sec? Because if you look there, you can see how different that looks. Your district should not look like that, particularly like this pink one. That's not really what you're looking for, because the people up here have probably little to nothing in common with the people down here. It doesn't allow for the representatives to meet the needs of their communities. Where if you look over here, those are people that are probably all going to have a community, things in common. So they've set forward a bunch of rules, and I'm going to give you some websites. And the reason that we brought this up is because it's going to be imperative for the public in Ohio to really pay attention to how the maps are drawn. Because when the maps are drawn and we get more balanced representation and fair representation in Columbus, then our issue is going to gather steam. Right now, that's not the case. So I'm really I've been talking with our board of directors and anybody who'll listen, essentially, and just kind of saying, I'd like everybody to pay attention to this. It's not the sexiest thing in the world. It's a little confusing, but it's going to be the public voice saying, we want these fair maps. These three organizations, if you want to flip to them, are working on this issue at the state level. And there's wonderful resources out there and training out there, and you don't need to be an expert on it. But when those calls to action come from these groups, it's really going to be imperative for every Ohioan to respond, to say that to the legislators that are going to be drawing this maps, I expect you to draw fair maps and stay within the guidelines and maybe even do better than the guidelines. So we just wanted to bring that up and discuss it because it directly impacts our vision and our mission. I mean, our ultimate mission is to pass the medical aid in dying law for the terminally ill in Ohio. So while the gerrymandering thing seems like maybe it doesn't belong, it actually does, because there was a large group of 75 organizations across the state of Ohio who came forward and said they wanted to be able to have virtual testimony, and they're all also advocating for fair maps, because it does impact a bunch of different organizations from grassroots all the way up. But Lisa talked a little bit earlier, and you saw it on the first slide, about while medical aid in dying is our mission to pass the law, there's a lot that goes along with that. Because anecdotally, when you look at states that have aid in dying laws, they also have better end of life laws. And that just goes in general. That then increases the conversation, makes the conversation less taboo, and more people are dying better in states that have laws. So we're really big advocates, and Lisa and I always talk about this, about patient-directed care. We both have had experience with hospice. We're both huge hospice advocates as well. And sometimes people will say to me like, well, we've got hospice, so why do you need this? And I said, well, you need to look at it. It's not an either or, it's an and. It's just another option on the spectrum of end of life. It's not going to be for everyone, but hospice isn't maybe for everyone either. But like Lisa said, we want to make sure people are having the best quality of life for as long as possible and all of their end of life options. So how did we start to do this? Well, we had to kind of stop, and Lisa and I had the opportunity to look at how some of the states across the country, when they passed laws, what went well, what didn't go well, where do they wish they would have focused more, focused less. And, so we really spent a lot of time kind of drilling down to what we thought was the most important, set of constituents, obviously, healthcare, obviously the public, and then, the policy and legal community, because we saw gaps, particularly in the healthcare and policy communities, where there wasn't as much effort or work done in those areas. And it came back once the law passed to make it a little bit trickier to access the law. So when the time comes and we do pass the law here in Ohio, we want to be able to have patients be ready to go and to have access and to have educated the healthcare community, and to also bring them on as supporters and as part of our collaborative efforts. So within each of these areas, we're always looking to build awareness, provide education, And then obviously to make sure that we're advocating and that they're joining us if that's something we would like to do. We'll probably be forming some healthcare coalitions and some different group coalitions because we have had like larger groups of like social workers particularly have been incredibly supportive of this, not only here in our state, but when we look across the country, the National Association of Social Workers local chapters are almost always endorsers of this and will speak and do testimony. So it's about fostering those relationships and those opportunities to talk and to kind of build that coalition going forward.
So it's back to me now, Lisa. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what it looks like in other states and, some of our hopes and dreams for moving forward. We pay a lot of attention to current events and what other states do, because that just helps inform us on what we need to do. This is an interesting concept of engaged neutrality for healthcare groups that sometimes groups would take. Either they have a stance that's not supportive, they have a stance that's supportive. Most commonly, they have some type of neutral stance, recognizing that their practitioners in states with these laws should be able to make their own decision if they're going to participate. But there's an argument that in being truly neutral, you're in fact not supporting the people in your group by providing guidance or education. So we would love to see more groups start to take on a stance of engaged neutrality. I think it was the family physician group that took on that stance sort of most recently nationally. And that's a big thing. That allows us to go to the conference for the Ohio family physicians and say, hey, did you know what your national group, what their stance is on this? Let's provide you with some education so that we want to raise the awareness, but eventually we would love to have them take a stand that is helpful in this process. So these are just some of the organizations that we would like to engage with overall. And this is a kind of a plea for all of you as well, that if you are involved with these organizations, help be our voice. Raise awareness about the issue, and that we can give you, we have a speakers bureau. We're happy to provide speakers and facts and figures. Again, providing fact-based education about this is just so important. So, and we've seen that in states like Massachusetts recently, they had a really large coalition of groups supporting it as an issue, and that just takes work to raise awareness and provide that education. And then ask for their stance. A lot of people get away with saying, well, we support you, but we would never say that out loud. And as more and more states pass these laws, we need to be moving toward, you need to say it out loud now. That's the only way to move forward. So I am going to do a super quick and dirty review of how laws get passed in Ohio. And I'm going to take the optimistic stance on actually passing legislation. My bullet points are really, top level. This diagram that was on the Ohio State Legislature's website made me laugh because it's got lots and lots of details in there. And basically, just about all of these steps are ways to derail passing legislation. So what some people don't know is that we have both the opportunity to pass legislation through our legislature and the opportunity to pass it as a ballot initiative. So if we have a bill that we want to see sponsored, we have to have a legislator sponsor it. And it can be either someone from the House of Representatives or the Senate, or both. There's currently a bill that I just saw that is introduced in both houses, and that tells me that they usually have very similar language, or they have slight differences. And if they go through the process and meet at the end, then they can agree on which language they want to include in the bill that moves forward. But at the beginning, you need a sponsor. And then that bill is assigned to a committee or a set of committees. Depending on the timing of it, It's required to have sponsor testimony, but that doesn't always happen. So, for example, in Ohio, our bill was sponsored by Senator Tavares, and then it was assigned to the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate. It did not move beyond that. But if they debate it, they can have multiple debates. They can have supporters testify. They can have opponents testify. They may do that again. If then they vote, that committee votes to pass it, then it goes on to the full body. So the full Senate, in this case, would vote on it then. And if that is approved, then it has to go over, it started in the Senate, then it has to go over to the House of Representatives and start that whole process again, where it's assigned to committee or committees, it's debated, they approve it, it goes to the full House floor for a vote. If all that happens, and again, this is the very basics, then it can go to the governor's desk to sign. The governor can also veto it. So there's a lot of work to be done. And one of the things that we always talk about in this type of effort is that in a state, to get legislation passed, Peg Sandine at Death with Dignity always talks about the three-legged stool, that you need three things. You need a grassroots group that does what we do, raises awareness and garners support. You need legislation and a sponsor, and you need a lobbyist who really is effective at doing what they do best and working to get bills passed. So right now, we are the grassroots organization. We are not lobbyists, we are not legislators. So this is what I know about this process, not being on the inside, but having had lots of great conversations with legislators about the subject. To pass a ballot initiative in Ohio is complicated because of the steps that are involved. You have to gather signatures a couple of times. You have to do it in a pretty strict time frame, and you have to gather 3% of the votes cast for the governor in the previous gubernatorial election in a certain percentage of the counties in a certain time frame. And what this ends up meaning is that you end up paying for people to help you collect signatures. Now that speaks back to the value of having a coalition of support for this. So if we had a coalition of 8 different groups who were also supporting us in this endeavor, we could get volunteers from those groups to also help in this effort, as well as pay for whatever professional signature gatherers we needed. So all of this work is in order to move us forward through these complicated procedures. So so that speaks to really needing fundraising and raising funds to be able to pay for that process.
So this obviously, if you've been to any of our presentations, I'm sure you've seen this list before, but we would be remiss if we didn't at least put it up. And we're going to talk a little bit more focused today, actually, about about social media and an upcoming program that we've got that we're really, really hoping is going to help us reach a lot of people across the state of Ohio. It's very pandemic friendly. We obviously had to shift a little bit in 2021. So we're going to go in and talk about those, and we'll talk a little bit about these other things as we move through the rest of the slides. I keep going to move the slide. Okay, this is our big campaign initiative for 2021 as far as really getting our access to and getting our hands hopefully in every county across Ohio. And what it's really going to take is our core group helping us to spread this across the state. We have put together a petition of support, and what we're asking people to do, this is not a legal petition for a ballot measure or anything, is you can see there we want to ask people to add their voice to the largest ever public record of support for medical aid in dying in Ohio. We want to do this so that this can be something that our lobbying team, our policy team can have, and will be able to pull up for any legislator and say you've got 100 people in your district that have signed this petition, and hopefully maybe another 100 people have sent in a letter to their legislator. And when you start to see that traction, that's when things move forward. They're basically going to move for two reasons. They're going to move because their constituents want them to, or they're going to move to avoid something bad happening if they don't. So if the petition of support, I don't know, I'm a cockeyed optimist. Lisa laughs at me sometimes, but you know, I'm going to be conservative and say in 2021, I want 2,000 people. Ultimately, by the time it comes for us, I want 5 or 10. That's my goal. We have 11 million people in this state. We talk to a lot. I feel confident we can do it if we can get everybody to pitch in and help spread it. People do want it. They will sign it. They just need to know it's out there. So we're going to be doing some things over the next few weeks. You'll probably get an email about this, and you'll start seeing a lot more social media about it. And I would just like to ask everyone, you know, to share and to spread the word. Because as a nonprofit and as a small organization, and we want to be good stewards of any donations that we do get, people helping us spread the word is the best way to go. And it's really the only way to go, because we can't really afford to pay for advertising across the entire state of Ohio.
Another thing that we're hoping to introduce around the same time as the awareness, the petition of support, is a video that's been made possible through donations made to the Leslie Keller Beal Memorial Fund. We're working with a group called DigiZoom Media, and storytelling is so imperative for making a difference and opening people's eyes to what's happening across Ohio, and that there's real people here in Ohio who want change. And so we're hoping to capture their voices in short videos, just short snippets that really effectively say why it's important for change to come to Ohio. And so we're really excited to be able to interview all these wonderful people in different parts of Ohio as a start, so that people understand what we're talking about. And we're hoping to introduce this around the time of the petition so that people can watch the video and understand the value of the petition of support. Again, other ways to communicate on our website, we've got ohiooptions.org take action is where you will find the petition. We currently have the ability for you to just click to write a letter to your legislator. You can, it will auto find your legislators and fill in a pre-filled message that you can customize if you like. And these are great ways to be communicating directly with a legislator. The petition of support, on the other hand, is a way for us to essentially bring to them a town hall type of concept. We're hoping to, in addition to gathering signatures, to also gather comments, so that we have the example. Ann and I talked to Senator Kenny Yuko a while ago, and he said that when he was considering the legislation for medical marijuana, he did hold town hall meetings, and he was just amazed by the stories that he heard by Ohioans who shared how important medical marijuana would be to them in their serious illnesses. And so those are not happening quite as much these days. And so we're hoping to gather all of these to sort of bring that to them and share these stories with the legislators when we get the opportunity to see them. This is just a little bit of a review, but when we're able and when we are invited to talk, or someone points out a group that we should go visit, we get there. We've got great displays. We have, this is a picture of Dr. Diana Spade, who I hope is on the talk today, who's an expert at this. She was a former volunteer medical director for Compassion and Choices in Oregon. So she is really able to have a great conversation about how this law works. And so again, we're looking for opportunities to get out there and talk. We've been invited to talk to lots of universities, which we love going and talking to students. They always have fantastic questions, but we really need to be raising awareness in other types of groups as well. And this is really important. Letters to the editor are so important for people to just post a short fact-based letter to the editor, sharing their story, but saying this is the reality of these laws in other states. An upcoming opportunity is if New Mexico passes legislation, that will be the 9th state and the 10th jurisdiction to have a law like this. And that's a great opportunity to write to your to your editor to say, this is important in Ohio. Why are we not talking about it? 1 in 5 people in America have access to this option, and Ohio isn't even discussing it. So legislators, let's get on this. If you are interested in that, we're happy to help that process. This is actually a page of our annual report that's posted on our website, and you can click on any of these articles and read the language in them and how they're done. Back to Molly.
So we're going to talk a little social media. We are everywhere. Well, at least we try to be everywhere. And every channel that we have, we take a bit of a different approach because we're looking at a different audience. The 2 largest channels in Ohio, Facebook is #1 and Instagram is #2 as far as usage goes. And the Facebook audience obviously is very much geared towards our demographic. It's approximately like about 85% of our current followers and likes are females. And on Instagram, the age gets a little younger. It still skews heavily female, but having a bit of a younger, just one group down, younger group. So we're hitting about, I don't know, probably 30 years within a window of ages in all of these different areas. On LinkedIn, we focus on a lot of healthcare business articles. We're building our YouTube channel with original content, but in the meantime, we've decided that we're going to create playlists. So people kind of have one-stop shopping. So they'll be able to come out to our YouTube page, look at any of our playlists that might be testimony from another state. It might be about other end-of-life legislation, other end-of-life laws, forms, things that other states are doing. And then obviously personal stories from across the country as well. And hopefully that will help people get, a little better education if that's kind of how they like to learn things. But I'm actually proud to say, and I did a little research today, and I didn't even tell you this, Lisa, so this will be a nice surprise for you as well. Outside of the 2 national organizations, we have the largest group of Facebook followers of any of the organizations in the country. And I'm super happy about that. I started when there was 150 people on about 150 people on Facebook. We are now over 1,500 and growing, which is why when I say spread the word, a lot of this is just letting people know that we're out there and people are coming. They want to see this in Ohio. And so you might be going, well, 1,500 on Facebook and 112 and 198 on Twitter. Those are very different formats. Instagram, we focus a lot on visuals. So we'll be able to, when that video project comes through that Lisa's working on, we'll be able to put those as part of our Instagram stories. And that's really going to be compelling for people because we want to bring them to our social media. So then we want to be able to invite them in to get our newsletter, to get more engaged, to follow. And so those video stories are going to be huge on a lot of our social channels. And on Twitter, we spend a lot of time interacting with other people in end-of-life spaces. So we interact with a lot of national and international end-of-life groups, not just medical aid and dying. We interact with hospice and palliative care folks and palliative care physicians and experts on certain topics. And we have grown our Twitter follower. We're 2 away from 200, which is just, so if you're on Twitter, please follow us. I've got to get over 200. But that has grown. It's very difficult in an end-of-life space to have a lot of Twitter followers just by the virtue of kind of what we do, which is why we tend to take a little bit of a broader approach. When Lisa talked about, we like to focus on, patient-directed care and hospice and palliative care and other things that we think are going to be interesting to people that currently follow us. And we've had a little trial and error, but we have pretty much found a good routine, and we kind of know what our folks are interested in learning about outside of our issue, but related to our issue. When it comes to sharing, and I'm going to ask you to share probably every time I see you, but likes are good, comments are better, shares are best. And again, that goes back to being a nonprofit organization and not having, you know, a gigantic advertising budget. We really do count on the folks that are on our social media channels to help spread that information. Because every time you share, that means that's one less dollar I have to spend to hopefully, you know, get my message in front of somebody. And let your friends know, invite people. And I think we've made our case here. We have so many things up in the air, even though we're not out physically talking to people, things are happening. And all of that takes resources. And so we have options. You know, when Alex's family stepped forward and created the Leslie Keller Beal Memorial Fund, you know, people can donate to that. It doesn't have to just be Alex's family and friends. People can put their resources into that, and that's going to be used for education and awareness. If somebody would like to establish a fund for something different, we can do that. We have opportunities to do planned giving that Lisa can talk to people about. And every little bit helps. And because we know not everybody's in the same situation, but every dollar we get allows us to go a little bit further in spreading our message across Ohio.
I think that we have covered it more than you all expected, probably. So we would love to open this up, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all and see if there are questions out there.